Hello, everybody, and welcome to Classic Rock Revisited, Episode 4. It's been a little while since I've been back here talking about music, but we had a Billy Joel last episode where we talked about The Stranger, one of his most influential albums. And today we're going to dive into a little bit more progressive rock and roll here with Chicago Transit Authority, which is the first album by the band Chicago. And today I'm going to have Mark Rowlands joining me to speak about this album.
I am back.
Yeah, the restraining order was lifted, and Mark is now allowed back at the podcast.
Yeah, it's great. I'm glad my lawyers were able to come through for me like that.
Yeah, it was a bit messy, but yeah, we're gonna get past it. We're just gonna move on. Is that okay?
Yep, that's good.
All right. So Chicago Transit Authority. This is from the band Chicago, as I mentioned earlier, which includes the musical talents of Robert Lamm, Terry Kath, and Peter Cetera, and a horn section of James Pankow, Lee Loan, I hope I didn't butcher that pronunciation, and Walter Parazier. And it was released in 1969 as the first studio album by the band. So, Mark, what was your first exposure to this album?
Well, I started listening to Chicago really only about 4 or 5 years ago. And they were one of those bands I knew about, but I didn't really know anything by them or anything like that. And so they were coming around here, and I was like, oh, I know this band. I should listen to them. And I started with Chicago 2, because that was the widely regarded best album when you look up anything about Chicago, that I saw at least. And I was like, oh, this is pretty good. Then I was like, I might as well listen to their first album. And so I listened to this, and in my opinion, this is the best Chicago album, hands down, not even close. I love this album.
Wow.
This is, in my opinion, this is one of my 10 favorite albums, period.
Okay.
I hadn't listened to it in a while.
I didn't know we're dealing with this much critical acclaim from you.
Yeah, I hadn't listened to it in a while all the way through, but listening back to it today, I freaking love this album.
It's a beast of an album, too. I feel like that's something that's important to note. These songs aren't exactly radio-friendly for the most part. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of bluesy rock and roll. If you guys aren't familiar with Chicago, it's kind of a mix of rock and roll and jazz in the progressive rock realm. And in this album, it almost feels like a live album because of how much they're really shredding the guitar and just letting loose musically.
I'm glad you mentioned shredding the guitar, because Terry Kath,
absolute legend.
Fun fact, Jimi Hendrix said Terry Kath was the best guitar player who ever lived. Let that
if it's coming
sink
from
in
him
for a second.
Yeah, we'll just let that sit for a second, guys. That's a bold statement.
So, Terry Kath, and he really shows it off on this album. His most probably recognized guitar work is in 25 or 6 to 4, because he just rips through the guitar solos on that song. But his guitar work on this album is flawless from top to bottom. And there's a couple songs.
We'll kind of dive into that. Yeah, we'll dive into that later. I hate to be the opposing opinion here. I think there's some parts in the album where they do let him loose so much that it takes away from the focus of the album. But I think if you look at it in the context of every song put together, it's a very impressive and ambitious album. And especially, I don't think there's many other bands who, in their first album, put out such a great piece of work.
Yeah, I mean, in what you said about Kath being let loose, I'm a sucker for that. As a guitar player, I just want to sit and listen to great guitar players play guitar for as long as they possibly can. So, that was never an issue for me. I can see where that can be an issue for some people, because it sort of does just start to focus on him at a point. But it is just, he is so good. And I wish there was more stuff with him on it. Tragically, Terry Kath passed away a long time ago. And so it's, there isn't a ton out there for us to listen to. But man, when he really lets it go, he really lets it go.
Yeah, and it's a showstopper too.
Mm-hmm.
Once he starts going out in that guitar, especially in the live version of 25 or 6 to 4, it's just
Oh yeah.
ridiculous. And he has such a good sense of improvisation in his music too,
Mm-hmm.
that he can take it in such a like seemingly random direction and then reel it all in. And that's something that you could also see in Chicago 2, which would probably be my favorite Chicago album. I just love how I think it balances
What's going on
Peter
here?
Cetera, Robert Lamm, and Terry Kath better than any of the other albums they put out. In this one, it surprised me a lot to see Robert Lamm in the spotlight for most of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, oh yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I'm glad you mentioned Peter Cetera because he is, I love Peter Cetera's vocals. I think he's an incredible vocalist, and I'm gonna get into that in one of the songs in particular on this album. But I just wanted to mention how much I love Peter Cetera, and him and Kath together was a power duo that not many bands have been able to achieve with two vocalists.
Yeah, and I'll try not to dive into Chicago 2 as much, since that's not our focus today. But I think the perfect example of how well those two musicians work together is on the first two tracks of the album, because I believe "Moving In" is the opener, and then you got Terry Kath's soulful vocals, and they go straight to "The Road," where Peter Cetera's his vocals are just so silky and smooth, and then you got Robert Lamm, who's very soulful as well. So I think a lot of people don't really discuss Chicago as a top tier band in terms of the vocalists, but I think they're just on the same level as a band like Fleetwood Mac or the Beatles, as far as having three really good talents fronting the band.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to agree. They're just really, really solid in every single aspect of it. Specifically, in my opinion, the best horn section ever put together for a non-jazz group. But just, yeah, top to bottom, they are just tight.
Definitely. And without further ado, let's just jump into the track by track. And it starts out with Introduction, which is a Terry Kath number.
I think this is a great way to start off the album.
100% agree.
When those first few notes hit, just at the very start of the song, you're like, oh, this is going to be that type of album. It's a great jam song. I mean, it's, 6.5 minutes long, about, I want to say. And that's the thing. There's quite a few longer songs on this album where the band just really goes. And I think Introduction is a great way to sort of showcase that right at the start of the album, because it's just a fun, upbeat jam song that you don't get with a lot of Chicago's later stuff. They tended to get more poppy later on in their career. That's why I love this album so much. Is it's a lot more raw, and it's a lot more just, I hate keep using the same word, but they're almost a jam band on this album, and it's really interesting to see the transition.
Definitely. And if you look at like a Chicago greatest hits album, if you look at their greatest hits from early on, it's vastly different than what you see later on with like You're the Inspiration and Hard Habit to Break and tracks like that, basically from 16 on for the most part. But yeah, this is such a great jam song, and I love how it just grabs your attention from the first note. It's very like in your face and confident, and I think there's a lot of bands that kind of find that confidence later on in their careers, but with Chicago it's just straight out of the gate. And I think there was a great standout guitar solo about the 4-minute mark, and I love Terry Kath's vocals on here. He has like a very gritty voice, very rich voice, and I think it blends super well with the guitar. And then you got that juxtaposition with the horn section, which is very like smooth and almost soothing. So you get this kind of multi-layered experience, and coming from the first track of the album, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, we talked about this in the Abbey Road episode, and this is something I talk about a lot when I'm talking music, is an album has to have, if not a really good first track. To hook you into listening to the rest of the album and to just hook you into the experience that the band is trying to provide for you. And that is certainly no exception with that for that rule when it comes to Chicago Transit Authority, because this song is just such a great way to introduce you to the band Chicago.
Yeah, and this isn't just an opener for an album. This is an opener for the entire band. So I love that confidence and that swagger that they bring to it. And I think this is probably one of the better introductions to any of their albums throughout the years, too.
Everything you said about the horns when they come in, it's just, I love the composition of this song because the horns are just they're seemingly doing their own thing in the background. It's a very jazz-inspired, almost improvisational sort of riff that they're going on, with the combination of the trumpet, the trombone, and the saxophone, where they're all like they're trying to get to the same place, but they're not necessarily taking the same route to get there. And I think it's a really interesting way to get the horns involved into a song like this. And yeah, I love Does Anybody Really Know What Time It Is?
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. And I think this is kind of the part of the album where you can tell that this is really Robert Lamm's, I guess I'll say masterpiece. I feel like that's a pretty bold word to throw out here so early in the album, but I think this is one of his best tracks in the album. And like I mentioned earlier, this is really an album that was dominated by him. Obviously, you have the moments where Terry Kath comes out of his cage and just completely rips on the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And you got a couple highlight moments from Peter Cetera. But a majority of this album is written and performed by Robert Lamm. And I really think he's a standout musician on here.
Yeah, and he really, like you said, this is his song. You can tell that by the piano playing in the beginning and, just his vocal performance on this. And you're right, like, in a lot of ways this is his album, and I consider this to be his song on his album.
Definitely. It's his defining moment for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And also I think it's a lot more radio friendly than some of the other tracks on this album.
It is, yeah.
Especially because of the length of it. Because we'll get into some songs later on that are, touching 8 minutes, and kind of sitting in the 7-minute mark for the most part, which you don't really see on albums later in the 70s, really. So this was kind of a product of its time. And we'll get into a song after this, actually. Why not? Let's just start talking about it now. The third track on here is Beginnings. So the reason why I brought up Beginnings kind of abruptly there is this is my favorite track on the album, but this is where you really get a sense of the improvisational feel of the album.
Mm-hmm.
Because this song is about 4 minutes in reality, and then you got another 3 minutes of just them jamming out and just doing their own thing and kind of going wild. So just some stuff I really like about this track. I love the harmonies on here, and I think the percussions are particularly strong because the horn section's obviously the focal point of a lot of these songs, but I think the drums and the lead guitar are really solid here. And one of the last things I'd just like to add on to this song is it's very simple lyrically, but it's also like really sweet, and kind of the content is very wholesome. So it's something that I think is perfect to listen to kind of in the evening time while taking a drive. It's just very comforting to me. What are your thoughts on this song?
I really like Beginnings. It's probably number 4 for me on this album.
Mm-hmm.
It is very good. I like what you said about how the song itself is probably 4 minutes long,
Yeah.
and then everything else is just, hey, we've got some extra time in this studio, let's just go for it. And I really like that feel towards the end of the song. Like you said, you know, the horn section obviously is the focal point of the band for the most part, especially on this album. But I could, I'm actually going to try to find when we're done listening to this just an isolated recording of the horns on this song. Because I'm telling you right now, that would be just as much of a banger
I
as
agree.
this song is already. I could just sit and listen to just the horn section. I don't need percussion. I don't need vocals. Just just the horn section on this song, because the reason I think they're the tightest horn section ever put together in a non-jazz setting is everyone, because they're all obviously jazz inspired and they all started playing jazz as most horn players do.
Hmm.
Um, and you can just, the influence is so present in not only the way they play, but like strictly the sound that they can produce from their instruments is very jazzy. There is, at least I know this is true for playing saxophone. I'm not quite sure as much with brass instruments. There is a way to produce a certain sound out of a saxophone just by the way you blow the air into it that can make it sound more jazzy and more embellished is the term that we would use in band. I was always told to stop embellishing my notes so much because I always played jazz, and when I didn't play jazz, I wanted to be playing jazz.
Hmm.
But the way they embellish the notes throughout their playing in this song provides a perfect tone for the horn section with all three players.
Like I said, we have about 4 minutes of like the actual song here. I like how it builds from the beginning to kind of erupting at the end. It doesn't have as much tension as some of the tracks that we'll talk about later, between the horn section and the percussions. But yeah, I think listening to an isolated track of just the horn section would be pretty incredible. And the last thing I'd like to add here on beginnings is I think I might prefer it if it's around the 4 minute length instead of the 7.5 minute length that it is. I listened to it on the greatest hits compilation of Chicago's music, and on that one it landed about 3 minutes, and I felt like it was a lot tighter, and re-listenable. Whereas if you listen to it with the 7 minute runtime, then once you hit about 5, it gets a little bit redundant.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you prefer? Do you like the extended version of it, or the one that is kind of tightened up for the radio play?
I usually prefer extended versions of songs in general,
Mm-hmm.
and this fits that mold. I much prefer the extended version, just because I like the idea that, you know, the main thing you want to do when you're in a group of musicians is you want to enjoy yourself while you're playing.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel you get that feeling from most songs in the extended version. Because in a song like this, it's just a jam session at the end. Guys are just, they're trying new things, they're improvising, they're having fun, and that's something that, I know I always like to do whenever I play in a band. If we're playing a 3 minute song, it's gonna be at least 5 minutes. Because we're gonna, I'm gonna want to do some stuff on guitar or saxophone, or the drummer might want to do some new things, or the bass player might want to do some new things. And so when you get an extended version of a song, I feel like it's more free and it's more loose and it's a more fun experience for not only the guys playing the music but the people listening to the music as well.
That's a really good point. Since I don't really have much of a background in musicianship, I don't think I quite relate to that experience as much. But that's a really fair point, and I think it's definitely more of a preference thing than it is a quality thing. For me, I kind of like the songs tighter and more structured and kind of like playing in its own sandbox instead of just having the entire beach, so to speak.
Oh, that's fair. A lot of people are like that. I'm just, yeah, like you said, I've got a background in all this stuff, and it's just, I like to empathize with band members when I can, and in
Definitely.
situations like that, I can tell, what, they're having a lot of fun, and that increases the experience for me.
Yeah, and in this recording, it's pretty obvious that they're having the time of their lives
Yeah.
when they're making it. So definitely. So that brings us into our fourth track on the album, and that's questions 67 and 68. So what are your thoughts on this fourth track on the album, Mark?
Peter Cetera is God. I love this song. This is my second favorite song in the album. Well, second or third, it depending on the day. But most days it's my second favorite song on the album. There's a great live version of this that I listen to constantly. And
I'm going to need a link to that.
I will send you the link to it. It's on Spotify. I don't remember what album it's on, but it is. Oh, talk about horns. As soon as those horns come in on this song, you are just blown away. The ba 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 ba, just all-time great horn section. And Pete Cetera singing this song is just heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And
especially contrasting with Terry Kath and Robert Lamb's vocals being a little bit more like bluesy and a little bit more heavy, and then you got this like really really light vocal performance from Peter Cetera. But I mean that's not saying it's not strong at all, because it's a really strong performance.
Oh, I think this is the best vocal performance on the album. Just the range that Peter Cetera shows off, like with those really high notes that he's hitting throughout the song. It's, for if anyone like us wanted to sing this song, it would just be us yelling indiscriminately.
Yeah, and a lot of voice cracks.
Yeah, exactly.
And squeals. Yeah.
And I know I try to sing along to this song every time it plays, and it's bad. It's really bad.
Yeah, I feel like there's a specific breed of music where if you try to sing it, you're going to need some cough drops or like a hot cup of tea afterwards to kind of soothe the vocal cords. It just blows my mind how impressive Peter Cetera's vocals are. And I think one of the biggest things that struck me about this song is I think this song is probably the biggest indication of where the band was going in the future.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
It's a bit more condensed, but there are moments where I don't want to say pure chaos, but they allow the musicians to kind of be loose, like you said earlier, and kind of do their own thing. And obviously Peter Cetera, as the band went on, continued to get a bigger and bigger role, especially after Terry Kath passed away. So yeah, I think this is a great indication of their future sound, and I think it also carries over quite well to Chicago too, where you see some tracks that kind of have a similar vibe to it. And yeah, that guitar and horn combination creates such a powerful sound. And this is another track where it's very uplifting and very, I'll say epic and triumphant as well.
This is one of those songs too, I'm glad you mentioned the guitar performance, where Terry Kath may not be at the forefront of a lot of it when he's playing. But if you listen in the background, like, you hear the horns, with their driving melody, you'll always hear Terry Kath noodling under them. And it's really fast, and it's really rock and roll, and it's just slightly hidden under these jazz tones with the horns. And I think it blends so well together, and it's the perfect blend of what Chicago was trying to do as a band. I mean, they always said, they're like, yeah, we're just a rock band with a horn section. Which they are a lot more than that, in my opinion, but, this early on, they're like, yeah, we're a rock band with a horn section. This is what a rock band with a horn section sounds like. It's the horns driving the melody as a song with a guitar solo just ripping underneath.
Definitely. And I think it's pretty impressive that this is one of the better guitar performances you can seek out here because, we've alluded to earlier, there's a lot of times on here where they just let him kind of shred the guitar and let loose and not really follow a structure. I feel like this song feels a lot more like sound and a lot more like polished and condensed.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't take away from the musicianship and make it just sound like it's trying to pander to pop radio.
No, you're right. It is very, they're not trying to pander.
It's very solid.
Yeah, it's very solid. And I think that is the best way to, to describe this song and this band.
Yeah, and then following questions 67 and 68, we actually have the shortest song on the album, which kind of goes back to the more bluesy inspiration that Chicago had, and that's Listen. So I've got to say, this is every episode. I have a word or a phrase that I just keep on repeating over and over again. And you can do a drinking game. You can do whatever you want for it. Last week it was structure for the Billy Joel songs. And this week, I think the word is tension that we're probably going to be seeing a lot more, especially as album goes on. This song has such great tension because of the instrumentation. The bass line stands out a lot to me on a couple listens, and it's probably the most bluesy track that they have so far on the album. But getting back to the tension, I think that's one of the greatest strengths of this album because the horns just add such a great element of almost mystery to it, and you got the clash between jazz and rock and roll throughout the whole album, and there's times where they perfectly blend together and they sound like just like a match made in heaven, but there's some times where they feel like they're just like pushing up against each other until it just eventually explodes. And then you kind of get to the chorus area. So hopefully I don't say tension too much more in the rest of this podcast. I'll probably try to do it like 2 or 3 more times, but I think this is probably one of the better examples of that.
Yeah, this is a great song. It's one of those songs that I've never really considered skipping it or anything, but that, like I said, I haven't listened to this album all the way through in a little while. And it's not a song that I like go out of my way to listen to.
No pun intended.
What's that?
No pun intended.
Yeah. But when I do, it's an enjoyable experience. I do really like this song. And I think you're right. It is, to this point, it is the bluesiest song we'll have on the album. There is one later on that beats it, but
definitely.
I really like the bluesier tone. I'm a blues guy. That's what I listen to most of the time. So if you're gonna throw bluesy, some bluesy stylings in a song like this, I'm gonna enjoy it. But yeah, this is just a really good, really underappreciated song on this album that I don't think a lot of people know this song.
Yeah.
Like
I was thinking about that too.
Some of the other songs on this album, I mean, this album was big, and does anybody really know what time it is big? Question 67 and 68 is big. Beginnings is big. Like, those are all big songs in the Chicago discography.
There's breakout songs.
Yeah, but this one, not so much, and I feel like more people should give this one a listen, pun intended that time. And just...
I agree.
I think this is a really solid song, about halfway through the album. A little less than halfway, and, just, I feel like it gets lost in the middle sometimes.
Yeah, it's not too flashy, but I think the more I listen to it, the more I enjoy it, and most of that has to do with the really good guitar lick that they have. It drives through the entire song, and like I said earlier, it's the shortest song on the album, besides the prologue, which we'll probably kind of skip past later. But
yeah, screw that.
Yeah, screw that. It's just talking. We want to hear the guitar. We want to hear the horns. But yeah, with Listen, it's it's one of those songs that you may skip at first, but eventually you'll just start forgetting to skip it, and then it becomes one of the better tracks of the album. And I think it finds a pretty good middle ground, and it leads into poem 58, which is absolutely off the hook, and that's the next one we'll be talking about. So poem 58 at 8 minutes and 35 seconds with probably 3 different song stuff in there. Mark, what were your thoughts on the song?
I think off the hook is the perfect way to describe this song.
It's almost like spooky and dark at times too, which I was very surprised by.
Yeah, it's all over the place. It has no idea what it is tonally.
Yep.
It reminds me of a... what's a good example of this? It reminds me of Star Wars Rebels.
Okay.
In a good way.
I'm going to need a little bit of explanation there.
Well, actually, that might not be the best comp, but that's what I'm going with, because I don't really like Star Wars Rebels, and I really like this song. But in a sense that, in terms of the themes of the song and what it wants to be tonally, like what kind of song it wants to be, it has no freaking idea. Just like how Star Wars Rebels has no idea if it wants to be a kids show or an actual good show that adults can enjoy, where instead it's just a crappy kids show.
That's fair. I wouldn't really think of that out of the gate, but I guess it's a pretty good comp. I really enjoy everything from 5 minutes to 8 minutes a lot. I feel like that's when the vocals come in, and there's this massive tonal shift, because I mean, really, this feels like 2 completely different songs, maybe even 3. But another thing I did like about the first couple minutes of it is the guitar lick, and it's not as sporadic as some of the other guitar licks on the album. It's just that has a really solid bass line. It just kind of goes through the entire song. Kind of that bam 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 bam. This is why I don't sing. Just look up the song. Don't let me do this. But I think Terry Kath does a very, very good job on this song, and it almost reminds me of the song Tusk from the Tusk album by Fleetwood Mac. Okay. Obviously, I'm always going to bring things back to Fleetwood Mac, but it's such like an isolated, like moody, kind of dark song, and it's kind of like hidden in the track listing. Really, it's not one of the most popular songs, but it's got a really interesting tone to it.
Yeah, it reminds you of that one song from that one Kevin Smith movie.
I've not seen Tusk. I'm embarrassed. I do know about the movie, but yeah, I'm just gonna go sit in the corner, and be ashamed of myself.
Tusk is a very strange movie. You don't have to watch it.
Yeah, I've heard he gets a little bit off the rails with some of his later movies after the classics, basically. So enough about Kevin Smith. We got another song on this album, and this one's Tusk. I hate to say it, it's the one song on the album that I will skip every time without fail, and I really hope that I'm not just a dissenting opinion here, and that's Freeform Guitar. So with this song, it kind of just sounds like a guitar's revving a car's revving its engines for about 7 minutes or so. And I think this is the only track on the album that I happen to skip every time I listen to it.
I have absolutely no comments on this song.
Yeah, I don't think is it even like a song?
I have nothing to say about this song. I'm sorry, I don't care about it. I don't listen to it. I actually skipped this when I listened to the album earlier today.
Yeah, I got about a minute in, and yeah, if you guys haven't heard the song before, it sounds like Terry Kath is tuning his guitar, but like with a sledgehammer or something, or like some like chainsaw.
And
I don't know. It's not very pleasing to the ears, and this is like the part of the album where, as much as I love Terry Kath and I am completely impressed by a lot of his stuff, this is where him going off the rails seems like it's going too far.
yeah, and I get what they're going for. It's
Yeah, for sure.
sort of a Sergeant Pepper's White Album style Beatles.
I can definitely see the White Album comparison there.
Yeah, like, we're just going to go off the rails and try to make music out of it. I think of the White Album a lot when I think of freeform guitar. It reminds me of like a Revolution number 9 or something like that. And yeah, I have nothing else to say about this.
Me neither. So we might as well just move on to track number 8. And actually, I don't think you did this intentionally, but you made the perfect transition because we're going to be talking about South California Purples. And I said that this was a perfect transition because they actually reference the Beatles in this song, which is one of the only notes I really have to talk about here, is they do sing a part from I Am the Walrus. And besides that, it's pretty impressive guitar work from Terry Kath.
Yep.
It's another one of those songs where I think he might have needed to reel it in a little bit.
Yep.
Or maybe this would belong more in like a live performance. But that's kind of all I got for the song.
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I really like Cass' guitar work in a lot of it. Yeah, I Am the Walrus thing. Yeah, that's interesting. This is another song I don't really care all that much about. I didn't skip it, but
Yeah, I did listen to this one the whole way through.
yeah, it's fine.
And I think there's one thing that's actually a pretty interesting tidbit on the topic of the Beatles, because if I'm remembering this correctly, one of Chicago's biggest inspirations was the Beatles. In the song from Revolver, "God Get You Into My Life," it kind of showed that a horn section and rock and roll could go together really well. And I like how Chicago didn't just completely rip off that song, and they kind of forged their own path. They used the same like means to get there with that like progressive rock feel, but they went a completely different direction with it. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think you're right where, this is, in my opinion, this is probably the most progressive, using air quotes, song on the album. And I've never really considered Chicago to be in the prog rock category.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When I think prog rock, I think more Supertramp, Yes.
Talking Heads,
almost stuff that led more into new wave.
Mm-hmm.
And in
like
terms
more
of
punk.
Yeah, like it led into new wave and punk. And so like earlier progressive rock, you got bands like the Kinks and the Trogs and stuff like that. So I've never really, but I would consider this song to be more of a prog rock song. Which that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and it's such
when
a.
I think prog rock. I don't necessarily.
It's
think
such a
Chicago,
broad
I think of
genre.
them more as a soft. Yeah, and I think of them more as soft rock, blues rock, sort of subgenre. But yeah, I'd agree that this song is pretty progressive, and it does take a lot from the Beatles, especially their more psychedelic weird stuff.
Yeah, and I love that psychedelic weird stuff from the Beatles. Once Bob Dylan got introduced to the Beatles, and gave them all the drugs, then their music just exponentially improved. Not condoning it, but made some great albums.
And that's happened with a lot of musicians. I remember my dad was telling me that's what happened with Eric Clapton.
Mm-hmm.
Eric Clapton was spending $10,000 a week on cocaine and heroin. He was putting out banger after banger. Then he got sober and he put out Lay Down, Sally, and Wonderful Tonight, which are terrible.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also, there's a part of the package that we should probably mention, and that's mental health issues. So,
yeah,
let's just walk away from that one a little bit. And I think the last couple tracks on this album didn't really do it for me too much, but now that we get on to track number 9 here, I'm a Man, this is where the album turns around again for me. So I know that you love this song, so I'll just let you lead off first.
Yeah, because I put you onto this song, right?
Yes, definitely.
This is my third favorite song on the album, or second, depending on the day. It's, it's there with questions 67 and 68. This song is so good. And it's not a Chicago song. Just throwing that out there. I don't know if you know this.
That's something I always forget, because it feels so like integral to Chicago's first couple albums.
No,
that it feels like it has to be theirs.
Yeah, this song came out in 1967 by the Spencer Davis Group and was written by Steve Winwood, who obviously went on to be in Traffic, Blind Faith, his own solo career as Steve Winwood, one of the most influential musicians of that era. Started as a kid in the Spencer Davis Group, wrote this song, and I'd say in terms of vocal performance, Steve Winwood does it better. I'd say in terms of an overall performance, Chicago perfected this song.
Definitely.
This is just an all-around great bluesy track. On the album, it's 7:43. The single's only 3 minutes and 27 seconds long, which I don't like.
I actually haven't listened to the single for that.
Don't. You don't need to.
I'll avoid it at all costs.
This is the definitive version of I'm a Man.
And I think it's the perfect length, too, because you get some of these songs in this album where it seems like they're maybe indulging a bit in their music and their musicianship. But with this song, it begs to be like an epic song. And especially since you have the 3 lead vocalists all teaming up for this one. And this actually being the only song on the album where all 3 of them do contribute. I think it's perfect the way it is.
Yeah, I think all 3 of them singing on this song does really, it really helps their version of the song. My only thing is the reason I say Steve Winwood is, the best vocal performances. In my opinion, the 3 of them couldn't replicate what Steve Winwood did on the original version. Because like I said, it came out in 1967. So Steve Winwood was 19.
19.
When he wrote this song and sang this song. And
that's impressive.
I'm trying to remember if it was I'm a Man or Gimme Some Lovin', where I believe it was Gimme Some Lovin', another Spencer Davis Group song, where, and to bring this back to Eric Clapton, Steve Winwood and Eric Clapton were in a band together called Blind Faith. They did a song called Can't Find My Way Home, which is one of the greatest songs ever written. And Eric Clapton was like driving down the road listening to the radio, and Gimme Some Lovin' came on, and he knew the producer who did it, and he called him, and he was like, hey, I think this is how the story goes. He was like, hey, who is this singing on this Gimme Some Lovin' song? And he's like, oh, it's some 16-year-old kid named Stephen Winwood. Like, that's the
Little did he know.
Like, that's the type of voice he had at such a young age. But back to the Chicago version. I also just wanted to mention, I just found this out. The guy Steve Winwood wrote this song with, his name was Jimmy Miller. He was a producer and songwriter who worked with Steve Winwood a lot. But then he started producing albums more often. And he did that run of 5 albums that the Rolling Stones did. Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street, and Goat's Head Soup. He produced all of those. That's wild.
Wow. That's quite a track record.
Yeah, just want to throw that in there. But yeah, this version of this song is great, and I love it, and I listen to it all the time. And there's a really great live version where they combine it with Um, oh God, not in the midnight hour. It's I'm a Man, Knock on Wood, and I can't think of the third song that's in it. And I'm going to find it.
I'll give my thoughts as you
So
look that
Noah,
up.
riff for a second.
I think the best way to describe this
Yeah.
song is beautiful chaos. It's so like sprawling and all over the place. But it really reels it in during the chorus, and I really enjoy, as I said earlier, having those three vocalists come together, especially since Robert Lamm kind of dominates the album as far as lead vocals. And yeah, I love how gritty this song is and how it really injects the album with so much energy, especially as you're going into the next track and Liberation, which closes out the album, clocking in at almost 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important on a track listing level just to have a song like this on side 2 with such energy and such conviction. So that kind of wraps up our thoughts on I'm a Man, but I think that's definitely a top 5 track on the album. And that leads us into Prologue, which, screw that, we're not going to talk about it. It's just 58 seconds of chattering, and that's kind of all we got there. But the next track we got, number 11 on the album, is Someday.
I like it. I don't love it. I like it. I think it's good. Pretty solid way to end the album. I don't have too many strong thoughts on it. I think it's one of the weaker songs on the album, just by the fact that I think a lot of the songs on this album are really good.
Yeah, I think if you look at the album as a whole, it kind of gets lost in the shuffle, but I was actually surprised how much I enjoyed it on repeated listens. This one we see Robert Lamm and Peter Cetera teaming up, so even though it's not the three of them together again, you kind of get a little bit more variety here. And this is one of the more politically charged songs on the album, which I think is something they kind of leaned into more in following albums. But having them chant "The Whole World's Watching" and this lyrics stuck out to me. Would you look around you now and tell me what you see? Faces full of hate and fear, faces full of me. I think that's a really interesting little tidbit from the song, and this is an album where I don't really focus on the lyrics as much, even though that's usually one of my priorities when I'm listening to albums. But it's just such an impressive album on like a technical level, and just so passionate and so energetic, and I think this song holds that energy pretty well. And then that's going to lead us into the last track on the album, wrapping it up, and that's Liberation, clocking in at almost 15 minutes. So with Liberation, I don't really have too many strong opinions on this one, as it is quite a lengthy song, and it's kind of hard to consolidate all my thoughts of it into like a little bit of commentary here. But I mean, what a beast of a song. This is definitely their biggest jam session song here, and I was looking it up on Wikipedia, one of the most reputable sources out there, and
that's where I just did all my research for the facts I brought.
You got to look at the footnotes. That's where the money's at.
Yep.
And this one was actually performed live in studio.
Yes.
So there weren't any technical tricks here. There wasn't any trickery to try to kind of like bring everything together. This was just them jamming out.
Yeah, and I love it. I think it's a fun song. I don't care that it's 15 minutes long. I will sit and listen to this song, and I will jam along with it, and I will just have a great time whenever I listen to this song.
Yeah, and this is also, I feel like this is a pretty good road trip song to listen to. I feel like this whole album is really nice for if you just got a lot of time to kill and you just want to listen to some good rock and roll music.
Yeah, I have this on my road trip playlist.
It's a very solid choice.
Yeah.
And do you have any more thoughts on this last track on the album here?
I think this is a song where most of the band, gets their last second in the spotlight for the album, because it is so long and there's a lot going on, and you can just really get a feel for the entire band as a whole, not just the horn section, but each of the individual members of the horn section. Each has their own thing to do, and you really just, it's a showcase for every single member of the band, where some of the other songs may highlight one or two people more than the rest. This one really gives an equal share, and that's something I really like.
And that's one of the nice things about Chicago, just as a band, is they handle a lot of their fame and a lot of their music making in like a very democratic way, where one person wasn't really ahead of the other.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the influence is kind of like seeped through the music, and you can kind of see here it's heavily dominated by Robert Lamm, and then you see a lot of the albums later on in Chicago's career headed by Pete Cetera.
Yep.
But they never let one guy completely control how the music was being made. It was a very collaborative process, and I think this last song is pretty indicative of the entire album and how everybody does have their moments. And I think with such a lengthy album like this, it's really important to have every player get their moment in the spotlight, but also not take it away too much.
Yeah, this reminds me of like when you're seeing a concert and they have the one song where it goes on like a really long time, and the band members like introduce each other, and then they play a little thing, and then they do that member by member. That's what this song reminds me of.
Yeah, and you kind of forget that you're listening to one song at some point. It kind of all blends together a little bit, and then I like how they reel everything in too. This is something that I'm going to bring up Chicago too again, because I love that album so much. But with the Make Me Smile melody that they have, I'm not sure if there's like a name for the entire set of songs, but you start out with Make Me Smile, and then you get about 3 or 4 songs deep, and you completely forget that song was preceding it, and then they bring it all around and kind of like conclude the song. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I love that full circle mentality, and kind of even albums that have like an interlude and an exitlude, like Sam's Town from the Killers, or Sgt. Pepper's with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Mm-hmm.
I love it when a band can introduce the music, go off, do their own thing, and then bring it all back and wrap it up in a nice bow.
Yeah, that's always nice. That just shows really good coordination by both the band members and the producers of the album. So that's always a nice little shout out to a producer too, when there's something like that on an album, because those aren't hard to do, or aren't easy to do.
You just kind of have to allot some space in the album for it. So that wraps up our track by track thoughts on all the songs in this album. So overall, Mark, what are your general final thoughts on this album?
This is an all-timer. I love this album. It's got some of my favorite stuff Chicago ever did on it. It's just fun, and it's a jam album, and when you get things like I'm a Man and Question 67 and 68, it really showcases just how good of a band this is. That's what gets lost a lot of the time, I feel, with Chicago, is when you listen to some of their later stuff, like You're the Inspiration, and that gets a little more poppy, you lose the fact that this is one of the great group of musicians ever assembled. And a lot of them, like, Terry Kath, Robert Lamm, Pete Cetera, you know their names. You don't know the names of the guys who play the horns. In rock music history, there's probably one like horn player that people really know, and that's Clarence Clements, former saxophone player for the E Street Band. But
Uh-huh.
in terms of just how good these guys are for how little recognition they got over the course of their playing with Chicago, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, and I think this is just such a great introduction to the band. I think this isn't my favorite album of theirs, but I think it's maybe the most essential of all their albums that they've released. And I think the first half of this album is just incredible stuff. I think Introduction's an awesome way to open the album. Does Anybody Really Know What Time It Is a great track. Beginnings is probably my favorite on the album. And then you go into questions 67 and 68 and Listen. It's surprising to see in such an experimental album how many hits actually came from it. And although the second half of the album doesn't quite do it for me overall, I think that's mostly due to Freeform Guitar being a song that I skip every time, and South California Purples being one that's a little bit more forgettable for me. I think I'm a Man and Someday kind of reel it back in, and just remind me of how good the first half of this album was and how good of an album it is overall. So I think anybody who likes jazz, rock and roll, or both should definitely give this one a try.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
So that wraps up our thoughts on Chicago Transit Authority. I actually didn't tell you about this prior to the episode, but we do have a segment at the end where we recommend one song per week. Could be from any band, any album, any era, but just a song that you think everybody should listen to who's tuning into the podcast right now.
Oh,
So
boy.
I'll actually kick it off here since I gave you absolutely no warning about this.
Yeah, I gotta think.
So for me, I'm going to have to go with You Still Believe in Me from the Pet Sounds album by the Beach Boys.
Great recommendation.
I've been listening to Pet Sounds so much more often recently, and even though I kind of took it off of a list of contenders for albums that I would cover on the podcast, at least early on, it's completely back at the top again. So expect a Pet Sounds review at some point in my lifetime.
Can I be on that episode?
Yes.
I adore Pet
I will
Sounds.
lift the restraining order for a couple more weeks.
I love Pet Sounds so much.
Yeah,
What a
it's
great album.
It's so influential on so many different bands, and I really love the pace of it because it's such a depressing album at its core, and it's really sad and kind of downtrodden at times. But you got like a lot of moments of just pure energy, and it still like keeps such a good pace. And you know me, loving like albums that are really tight and like held together really strongly with instrumentation. This album is only 36 minutes long.
Yeah.
So it's really tight and to the point, but it feels like you're going through an entire experience throughout the runtime instead of just being a collection of hits. So You Still Believe in Me. The instrumentation on the song is just incredible, and I think it's one of the more defining songs of the Beach Boys. So that's going to be my recommendation this week, and foreshadowing for a future review.
Yeah, this isn't my official recommendation, but God Only Knows is a top 5 song all time for me.
Paul McCartney said it was the best pop song ever made.
I would agree with him.
Yeah.
God Only Knows is a perfect song.
And it's absolutely beautiful. So well done.
But for my official recommendation, I was really put on the spot here.
Apologies for that.
I'm
But we're getting
going
the
to go
real.
with
It would be so fitting because of the improvisational feel of this album that I would put you on the spot and make you improv for the song recommendation.
that is true.
It's thematically relevant.
I'm going to go with you're not going to know anything I'm saying in this sentence.
Okay.
But there's an album in 1975 by a guy by the name of Roy Buchanan. was a guitar player, phenomenal guitar player. They call him the Telemaster because he played a Fender Telecaster, and he was one of the best to ever do it. The album is called Livestock. It's a live album. And the song I'm recommending is Can I Change My Mind from 1974 live in New York City. And
Okay.
it's a just great, one of the best guitar riffs ever written. Just a really light chord progression that'll really, get you in a happy mood, upbeat song, great vocals, great guitar work. What, lesser known song. Not a lot of people know who Roy Buchanan is nowadays. He was big back in the day, but sort of, he passed away, and not many people remember Roy Buchanan. But that's going to be my recommendation is Can I Change My Mind live off of the Livestock album by Roy Buchanan, 1975.
I've actually heard the album, but I actually haven't listened to that track before, so I'll definitely keep my eye open for that. Also, on the topic of music recommendations, I gotta say, Bell Bottom Blues by Derek and the Dominoes. You recommended that song to me. I would highly recommend for everybody listening right now.
I recommended that album to you, and I'm still
try.
waiting for us to do a Layla and other sort of love songs episode.
Hopefully we will get there soon. I gotta explore their music a little bit more, or else I'll sound like I'm just BSing everything I'm saying. So I'll definitely get back to you on that. And Pet Sounds is definitely going to be a future episode, so keep your eyes open for that. And that wraps up the episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and thank you, Mark, for being on today.
I love joining you on this wonderful podcast of yours, just talking a little music.
Of course. And for next week, we'll have Prince or Michael Jackson being covered, and yeah, we'll have a lot more content coming out soon. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.